All right. Hello again for everyone who is still joining us. Thank you all for attending the Best of Pathways to Wholeness webinar today. We're really excited to share this programming with you. Again, if you would like to introduce yourself in the chat, please drop your name and where you're joining from. And also, if you have any questions throughout, please put those in the Q&A feature, as we will have a little bit of time for question and answer at the end. But I will pass it on to Sandy Ovalle, our Director of Campaigns and Mobilizing here at Sojourners, SojoAction, who will share with us all this awesome programming that she's been working on.
Oh, it's so good to be with everyone today. It is a hot and rainy day in Washington, D.C., so thanks for spending this hour with us wherever you are. Pathways to Wholeness was a vision to bring together two passions, spirituality and community health. And today I will be sharing with you a little bit of an overview of this project, and I'm going to let you into some of the stories and the conversations that we began at the symposium, and want to invite you to join us in championing a greater integration between spirituality and health. I want to give thanks first to the California Endowment who funded this project, and to the team of SojoAction, the mobilizing arm of Sojourners, and to all of Sojourners that have been supporting this project throughout. And this project was born of a story. I am a Mexican woman. I am an immigrant, and I'm the daughter of Jorge Ovalle Sanchez and Maria del Carmen Gomez Rojas, who still live in my home city. So when I came to the United States, you can imagine that I was very lonely. And it was communities of faith that embraced me and welcomed me and made space for that. And when I've fallen sick, it's been communities of faith that have accompanied me. And they've been present throughout my journey. Throughout the years, and especially during the pandemic, I also saw that many of us started new expressions of communities of faith, particularly many that have been alienated from traditional ways of worshiping or traditional institutional places of worship, have started new places of reconnecting with our ancestral spiritualities. And in those communities, I saw a lot of healing and wholeness happen in very deep levels. And in those connections that were being made, we were making sense of our spirituality. And so it is out of that story that Pathways to Wholeness was born. You know, one of the things that motivated me to start this project was that we often hear the negative impacts that spirituality and religion can have on health. You know, we've all heard things like pray depression away. And when it's given like that without context, it is often, it's often hard to hear that we don't acknowledge the ways in which science plays a role and the ways in which our brains work, and that we have so many resources at our disposal. And so I wanted to highlight some of the ways in which spirituality and religion also have a positive impact into our health. We know that there's a lot of this negative rhetoric that has already been lifted, but one of the areas that I hadn't seen a lot of lift is how do spirituality and religion play a role in bringing more health. So many times we can treat faith and health as two very separate and distinct worlds with their own sets of rules, with their own sets of players. And the reality is that both worlds are dealing with a person's and a community most intimate parts, our bodies, our existence, and our very futures. And so, because of these, they should be conversing more often, more clearly, because when people come into either one of these spheres, people come with their whole selves. They come with all of their bodies, their beliefs, and their being. So we wanted to have these conversations between the faith world, the spiritual world, the healing world, and this and them to have them in conversation. And then you'll see in a little that we also wanted them to be in conversation with political leaders. So Pathways to Wholeness, this project had four big objectives. We're not going to go into the depth of how we accomplish all those objectives or not, but I'll tell you a little bit about those objectives. So the first one was to raise awareness of the impacts that religion and spirituality can have on health. can have on health, as I mentioned. The second one was to uplift the stories of Californians who are integrating spirituality, health, and healing in their communities. And we did that by creating videos that would tell their stories to more people so that people could see how Californians were living this out. We also wanted to leverage partnerships between these spiritual and healing communities, the health sector, and the policymaking sector. And so we wanted to host a symposium that will bring these communities together to educate us around the different areas that we each were in, to build partnerships and to create this more synergy or integration. And we took a first step in that. And we'll highlight some of those moments today in this webinar. We'll highlight some of the videos of what happened at that event. And the ultimate goal of all of this was that we wanted to build power in communities to influence health systems and our policies, our racial equity policies and public health policies. And our hope is to get there one day. And part of that is having these conversations at a very local level so that policymakers and health officials become more aware of the ways in which communities are already integrating this spirituality and health areas. And when they think of funding public health programs or when they think of starting public health initiatives, that they think of these communities too as integral parts and integral players into how we will do that. So this project is focused in California, and that's what we will see today. But we want this to be able to travel everywhere. We believe that the integration of health and spirituality is part of becoming more holistic in our approach to community health. And so that's why we decided to name this project the Pathways to Wholeness. And the first thing that we did is that we began by asking these organizations in California what wholeness looked like for them in their communities. From Oakland, Sebastopol, to Santa Ana, California, passing through Fresno, we asked 7 organizations to tell us what wholeness looked like. So let's look at some of the answers from California practitioners who are building healthy communities through spiritual practices and more in their cities, who are part of the video series that we produced. Give me one sec here.
Wholeness looks like spaces where we can make connections between our family lineages and who we are. Wholeness looks like community care that goes beyond what we know or is like normal in the US.
Wholeness, from the perspective of my people, the Igbo people, is that we're all one. We're already whole. So even when we feel broken and even when we feel torn apart or torn into multiple pieces, we're inherently whole. And then we just need to remember our wholeness, even in our brokenness. And the connection between ourselves, each other, nature. You know, if you think about the concept of chi, which the Igbo people believe that you've got your own personal God, which is a piece of the big God. And so we're just little droplets of water. And when we all come together, we're the big puddle of water. We're all God put together. And this is not just human-centered, but everything, the sun, the water. It's easy to believe we're fragmented or separate or not connected. But from that concept, I remember that we're actually all whole.
Knowing that you were not alone and trying so hard to find a community of other people to just create friendship, I guess. Because I feel like in addiction, a lot of issues, especially mental health things too, is isolation. That's really where I feel like the real it all stems from this place of loneliness and not feeling connected. But when you can feel connected to people where you can feel safe or seen, like really seen, even in your ugly parts of yourself, I feel like that's where healing really can begin.
what would it look like for the community to be whole? I guess it would be everybody just having access to all of their needs with Hearts and None. So basically, it's like a beautiful home to live in, to feel safe in, nourishing food, and just the love and support of community all the time without having to worry about, all the capitalist stuff that really just like exacerbates all the problems that we already have. So everybody just being in good health and having access to good health and joy and laughter, and yeah, that's what it would look like.
When somebody comes into one of our programs, we don't see them as like, okay, what do you want from your life and how can we help you get there? Or like, we see this about you and this is how you can change and be different. It's like, you're here, welcome, all of you is welcome. And you come here with all your bumps and bruises and wounds and beauties and gifts, and so all of that is here.
So wholeness speaks to the just relationships that we have with ourselves and our bodies, our spirits, our fellow human beings, the natural world that surrounds us, and the systems in which we participate. However, Western epistemologies and practices have fractured our community's ability to feel that wholeness and to experience and to be whole by disconnecting us from our own voice, overvaluing our minds over our bodies, centering our lives on our own benefit alone while forgetting others, voraciously producing and consuming goods and resources, extracting lands, and creating oppressive systems where some are valued more than others. Western epistemologies have also fractured our spiritual systems, making spirituality a very personal practice that is unfazed by the aches of our communities. But wholeness can be recovered and we can reconnect to this. And so a lot of the practices that many of the practitioners that are featured in this program are about remembering the ways in which we are whole, remembering the ways in which we can bring the fullness of who we are and the fullness of our beliefs, where our beliefs are not demonized. And so I want to watch or to zoom in into the story of Freedom Community Clinic. Freedom Community Clinic is a clinic that is hosted in Oakland, California, that was founded by Dr. Bernie Lim, from whom you'll hear in just a minute in this highlights from the symposium that we hosted after we went to all these cities collecting stories. Dr. Bernie Lim describes herself as a creator, a healer, and a warrior, and she is the daughter of Filipinx and Toisan immigrants. And she is the first in her family to become a physician. She founded Freedom Community Clinic at 24 years old through the Oakland Youth Impact Hub. She also serves as faculty at San Francisco State's Institute for Holistic Health Studies. And I think you would really enjoy meeting her. And as she reminds us that remembering that we're bound to one another, that we have been able to heal our communities from centerings, that we can reclaim those connections and insights again. So let's listen to how Freedom Community Clinic is actually doing that.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. The remembrance work is so necessary, and for me, would love to just tie in the story with the resources, because this is all remembrance work. Again, I'm 29 years old, the first in my family to become a physician, and all the doctors out there, Dr. Uzo, Dr. Tiffany. I come from a family where we didn't trust the doctor, and my mom and my dad, they're here. And my mom, hey mom. Coming from a Filipino family, she would always tell me, we're not going to the doctor. You have Vicks Vapor Rub, you have Sprite, and you have a roast caldo. Those are your doctors. We're not going to get any appointment. And, I would have to say, those are actually very healing, and they've been able to cure a lot of things that I didn't think that they would cure. However, A lot of my family, including my mother, had very, very serious medical issues to the point where we did have to go to the doctor, and they did have encounters that were very traumatizing to the point where they had to undergo procedures of which they didn't know to the full extent of the consequences of those procedures, and also it resulted in death for so many of my family members, and that's very traumatizing. And I realized that the story of my family is not just our story, but the story of so many Black, brown, and immigrant people, of which the medical system has not been accountable to the history of violence and exploitation. And so for me, witnessing this trauma was it just was so impactful on my journey, and I witnessed my family and my loved ones remember their bodies through so many of their ancestral healing practices, whether it was spiritual healing practices or indigenous energy cleansing or acupuncture or massage therapy. These practices helped my people come back to their body in ways that the medical system could never. And so for me, I'm always going against the grain. So I go into medical school really wanting to learn about what is the language, what is the reasoning as to why this health system is not actually healing to our people. And I realized that actually within the Western medical frameworks, we're taught to treat disease. We're taught about different pathophysiology and different pharmaceuticals and invasive Western medical treatments, but we're not taught how to uplift health. And for me, this was very difficult, and I didn't feel like a healer, as I was talking about in the video. And so in my fashion, I've been a community organizer for a very long time. I would go to medical school classes, and then I would run to community organizing meetings in Oakland, and I would sit with the doctors of the Black Panthers and lots of the elders who were just really about bringing, again, these ancestral healing practices with Western medicine. And I was so inspired by, again, witnessing how my family's story was building upon this legacy of community healing. And at 24 years old, I was like, what does a healing healthcare system look like? Because I'm too cute to be in this hospital, and it's overworking me. I'm very stressed. This is not okay for my health, and this is not sustainable for our healthcare workers or our patients. So what can the healing healthcare system look like that is joyful, that is medicinal, that is a turn-up, that is multicultural and intergenerational and honors social justice and culture? And that's what Freedom Community Clinic is. It's this experiment of love of what a healing healthcare system can look like from a youthful perspective. And just so honored that Dr. Tiffany is one of our main community organizers on the team, but we're led by 7 women, gender non-binary, people of color. Half of us are under 30, and we are really putting into action what a healing healthcare system can actually look like for our people.
The spirituality that Dr. Bernie and Freedom Community work is seen in the rituals they hold, in the relationships they have with the land in which they live, in the plants with whom they work. And Freedom Community Clinic helped us identify 2 of the main questions that we began asking. One is, how can we uplift health and not just treat disease? And that's part of why this conversation needs to be happening and this integration needs to be happening. How can we approach public health, community health, and approach this conversation between the faith world and the health world and the policymakers, not just to treat disease, but to actually promote what's already good and uplift the health thing that is already happening. And the second question that Dr. Bernie helped us identify and that we want to hold on to is that how can a healthcare system be founded on love and care and include all of these ways that honor the communities from where we come from? And so if spirituality is about wholeness and just relationships, then Freedom Community Clinic is onto something. And so I want to keep listening here for how they're living out this wholeness in their relationships and how they're moving in their community.
Yeah, thank you for saying that.
I can go to the next slide. Mm-hmm.
The remembrance is so necessary, and for me, would love to just tie in this.
Let me try this again. And this time we'll listen
For us,
how
the
they're
specific
moving
impact, I
with
think, is
their-
really about
with their community at Freedom Community Clinic. Give me 1 second. And so we asked Freedom Community Clinic, what was the impact that they were having? And here's how they're working with their community.
impact, I think, is really about meeting people where they're at. We see ourselves as the healing front
line. And I always remember Dr. Tiffany's car and Sabrina's car. How did we start? We started out of the trunk. We started actually bringing healing to the people on the streets and in parks, and we would set up our healing clinics with the people. And we would pull up our massage tables, our acupuncture needles, our blood pressure machines, and we would pull up to freeway underpasses, youth centers, streets, and we would actually bring so much of this healing directly to the people in places where they felt safe. So again, it's a very grassroots, scrappy origin where we did this out of a deep love of knowing that we can't ask our people to go to a sanitized hospital building or a wellness spa where they don't see themselves reflected and they don't feel safe. We have to go to where they are and build that trust and build that relationship. And that has just been so foundational to the trust that we have built over these years, because I always just think of how much it opens people up to these healing modalities, again, that we forget that they've been commodified and made inaccessible, when really these are the healing practices of Black, brown, and immigrant people. And I love talking about how, especially in the Bay Area, you know, hyphy music is big to us. Lowrider culture is huge to us. So even till now, you will see us posted up for our healing clinics. We partner with Oakland rappers, and we are out there with our massage tables, with our acupuncture supplies, with our altars. And we are actually holding these healing clinics in places where people don't think that this is a stereotypical place of healing or of a clinic, but this is actually one of the most vibrant places where we can really meet the people where they're at. And it's just so beautiful. I remember when Tiff was out at a family festival in Deep East Oakland, and people have never tried acupuncture before, and because of Tiff's just amazing demeanor and trust building, she was able to get one person to try out acupuncture needles in their ear, and they're like, what are you doing? And then eventually that person corrals their whole family, and you got basketballs flying and people barbecuing right next door, and people are singing Too Short, blow the whistle, what's my favorite word, with different, like acupuncture needles in their ear, and just feeling safe, feeling held. And I remember so many people would say, wow, this is, the first time I've actually felt so at peace. And I've never seen someone like Dr. Tiffany actually offer acupuncture to me, and that's really the reflection constantly at Freedom Community Clinic, is meeting people where they're at.
It's meeting people where they're at. And I love what Dr. Bernie here is sharing. In my background, I've studied Mujerista theology, and in Mujerista theology, a theology that is based on the lived experiences of Latina women, we have a concept that we call lo cotidiano. And lo cotidiano means the everyday. And in this theology, we are told that we meet the divine in the everyday of life, that is where the most powerful spaces happen. And so I love that Freedom Community Clinic has this services on the street in the everyday life, that it is not separate, that health is not something that we go and do in a building, but it's something that is integrated. And it is there on the streets where healing happens, and it's happening in the everyday. And it is there where the divine is, where life is, where all of these things are coming together. In the symposium, we also hosted different conversations, including one on maternal, newborn, and child health. And Dr. Uso Nwampa, she is a community health register nurse. She's also a collaborator with the Freedom Community Clinic and Sacred Roots, another organization that we featured. She is a researcher, and she's a dance facilitator and educator. She hails from Enugu, Nigeria, and she has a strong belief in the healing power of music and dance. and integrates these elements into her work to promote health. And Dr. Uzo shares a framework for community health that was also a highlight of the symposium. So let's listen to that. I'm going to have the same trouble again because
For
I
us,
don't
the
know how to
specific impact,
ask
I
here.
think, is really about meeting people where
It's like somebody with better experience should be helping me here. There's Dr. Uzo. Now it worked. And here's what Uzo is sharing with us.
Wambogo jelu nubili nuwe osini hunaya dada o. Wambogo jelu nubili nuwe osini hunaya dada o. Nwanne m ga na chi mu na-akpọ m na mma onye ire ahụ bụ m aye ihe dị n'ọba aye ihe dị n'ọba
Daalụnụ. Afọ m bụ Ụzọamaka Nkemdele Nwamkpa. Abụ m onye Igbo.
ndị kpọpụta m ebe a bụ ndị be anyị ndị Iwolo Eziagụ. Ana m ekene unu. My name is Uzamaka Nkemdele Mwamkpa. I am the daughter of Uzamaka and Ebele Chupu, granddaughter of Mada Abuchi Shidiobu, Nwara Shiono, and Wovuako, great-granddaughter of Udu and Ugona, and great-great-granddaughter of Akwudumano, and many, many other names that I do not know, but it's because of them that I am. And I chose community health nursing because in nursing school, we focus so much on acute care medicine in the hospital where people are sick. So it's like sick care. But in community, we look at the well population. We look at how to make sure that people don't end up in that place, the hospital. Great work that's done there, by the way. However, most of life belongs in the community. So I'd like to kind of paint a small picture about the framework that we use in community and public health. If you can think of a target, you know the target symbol? There's like a bullseye in the middle, and then a ring around it, and then perhaps a ring outside of that. So we'll just look at these 3 rings. In the middle is the child, the individual / families. Outside of that is the communities in which that child lives and plays and prays, right? So that's the schools, the churches, the neighborhoods, the parks. And then outside of that circle is systems. Dun, dun, dun. That's where our government comes in. And that is where a lot of decisions are made, and that trickles into the child. So no matter what that family does, that family can play, pray, get educated. And if the systems push down policies into that child, no matter what that family does, they would not thrive, okay? So in community and public health, we look at interventions at each of these places in this framework. I think Bronfenbrenner, I'm not sure if I'm saying his name properly, you know, he came up with the human ecology theory, and that's the framework that we use to look at how we're going to bring interventions in. Now, my purpose is to help us all remember our old ways of being, to help us remember before it was colonized out, stolen, just taken away, right? And when I arrived in Arizona after I was done with undergrad, I was so passionate about community and public health nursing. I got the privilege of working with a program called Nurse Family Partnership. And this program introduced me to a group of women who were experiencing postpartum mood disorders. And we decided to create a beautiful space for them where they could come and just receive alternative and complementary services, massage, dance, acupressure, acupuncture, play groups, mama and me, dada and me, you know, those sorts of things. And so I held a space for mothers to dance. And sometimes we'd have one mother, sometimes we'd have zero. Sometimes, and I would be there religiously every week, every Tuesday at 6 p.m. Well, most times no one showed up. But when we surveyed the mothers, we learned that they just wanted to know that there was a service there, just in case they felt healthy enough to leave their home and come and dance, all right? And so this took me to a different place, to Aotearoa, which is New Zealand. Somehow Americans aren't so excited about this kind of work, but they were very interested in mothers and babies and dancing. And when you mix culture and spirituality and health, they were into that. So I went and visited them and danced with the mothers and babies. And after that, we learned out of the 4 pillars, I have an additional pillar, which is social well-being that we work with, which brings in that community piece that you were talking about. And we found that out of their physical well-being, out of their emotional well-being, out of their spiritual well-being and social well-being, can you guess which pillar that they felt the most supported in that space? What do you think it was? Yes, it was their social well-being. These women, these mamas were isolated. The depression, the anxiety comes from disconnection. There is something that's happening where we get disconnected, and these old ways somehow reconnect us. The singing, the dancing together, the playing together, the being in nature together, the foraging together, the eating together, the praying together. That is the thing that reconnects us. But somehow that's not being prescribed by our healthcare providers. Why not? Right? And so after I spent time there, I decided to come back here, and I'm still asking the questions, you know, where in this bullseye target, like how can we provide the intervention at every level, which I'm so excited to be a part of this panel because it feels like this is an example of where it's happening, right? We've got intervention happening through policy. We have interventions happening through faith-based communities, through the schools, right? Through the public parks. It needs to happen not just with the families saying, why aren't you eating healthy? And, you know, like, what is wrong with you and your baby? And why is your child doing these things in school? Well, we have to zoom in, and we also have to zoom out, right? So I'm going to end here so that we can talk more.
I wish you could have been in the room and share space with Dr. Uzo, who exudes such joy. And part of what happened at this symposium in last May and the questions that she brought up is that most of life does belong in community, and that we do a disservice by disintegrating and separating people from that community. And how can we integrate? And so I hear that again and again, like people experience that loneliness, that disconnection, and reconnecting and integrating life is key. And so someone that's really practicing some of this is Dean Varun Soni. Varun Soni serves as the Dean of Religious Life at the University of Southern California, one of the largest universities, private universities with 50,000 students, a very diverse university. And he's a multidisciplinary scholar with a diverse educational background spanning law and religious studies and public diplomacy. And he is going to speak about his work with college students, the mental health crisis among this population, and how spirituality is playing a key role in addressing it. So let's finish this one. I guess it doesn't let me move until we listen to this. And this is Dean Varun Soni. And
the numbers that keep me up at night, and I think the numbers that should keep all of us up at night, are 65, 35, 10. Right now, we're in a situation where where 65% of our students on college campuses are so consumed by anxiety that they're having trouble functioning. So anxiety is now baseline. That's the baseline. 35% of our students are wrestling with depression or some other kind of mental health challenge, and 10% of our students have had thoughts of suicide over the last year. And so on a campus of 50,000 students, on a campus that looks like it's right out of a Hollywood movie set, on a campus that looks like a brochure for what a campus should look like, on a campus with 320 days of sunlight every year, on a campus that is the Hollywood campus, the football campus, the dream for so many students. I have 5,000 students walking around each day on my beautiful campus thinking about their own death. And half of them, 2,500 students, who have a suicide plan. And as a result, I've probably overseen more memorial services for students than anyone in the country over the last 15 years. And when we have suicide on our campus, we have contagion, we have copycat, right? We have clusters. And so these are the numbers that really, like I said, they still keep me up. And every year I noticed from 2014 on, it got worse and worse and worse. And at the root of it, I found there was another crisis. In 2014, I started talking about a mental health crisis in American higher education. Everyone thought I was an alarmist. Last year, 80% of college presidents and university presidents said that their number one concern and number one challenge, not free speech, not tenure, not public safety. They might have changed their analysis this year. I'm talking about last year. Not donors, not the political landscape. Their number one challenge, the mental health of their students and faculty. Right? But now that 10 years later, everyone is talking about what I was talking about 10 years ago, I no longer see what we're going through as a mental health crisis. I now see it as a spiritual health crisis, and that's why I appreciated the comments so much this morning, because I do not believe we have a mental health crisis anymore of anxiety, depression, and suicidal ideation. I believe we have a spiritual health crisis of meaning-making, community building, and human connection that manifests as anxiety, depression, and suicidality. This is also, and this was mentioned earlier, but I'll have to mention it again. The book that really changed my way of thinking about this was a book given to me by a friend of mine when I became a father in 2014 for the first time, and that was The Spiritual Child by Lisa Miller. And she's become a friend of mine too. You should read this book if you haven't already, because what she says is that if you have an intergenerational spiritual or religious experience growing up. That means if you go to church or synagogue or masjid or gurdwara or temple with parents or grandparents growing up, then you are 70% less likely to experience depression as a young adult. And so the things that we have as children in terms of protective factors that religion has historically provided to people are the things that protect us as young adults. And what I see on my campus is the biggest story in American religion today, and that is the rapid disaffiliation from religion. In 1950, 2% of Americans were not affiliated with religion, 2%. Today, 25% of Americans are not affiliated with religion. That's the fastest growing religious demographic in the country. It's not Christianity, it's not Islam, it's those who are not affiliated. But for our college students, for my first year students, what do you think the percentage is that's not affiliated with religion? 51%. Double the national population, probably 10x their grandparents. We're talking about 5% of grandparents not affiliated with religion, 50% of grandchildren not affiliated with religion. This is the biggest story happening in American religion today, right? It's happening in real time. And so when I see the unprecedented number of young people who are not affiliated with religion, with the unprecedented number of young people who are going through a mental and spiritual health crisis, you know, correlation doesn't always equal causality, but in this case, I am convinced it does. And so, why is this generation more depressed than students were during the World War II? And why is this generation more anxious than students were during the Great Depression? Because they're going through two things that no generation has ever gone through, and they're going through them at the exact same time. So it's easy to be critical of a generation of coddled snowflakes, but none of us have ever gone through what they're going through. The first, of course, is the loss of religion, which I talked about, the loss of the protective factors of meaning, purpose, identity, community, awe, transcendence, the essential aspect and language of what it means to be human, right? And I tell our students, you don't need religion, you don't even need God, but you need something sacred in your life. You need something that gets you up in the morning, not just something that keeps you up at night. You need a North Star. Your compass has to point somewhere. That can be hip hop, that can be sports. That doesn't have to be theological in any way, but you need something sacred in your life, and I see that our students really struggle with that. The second sort of trend that intersects with this is the rise of social media. Like I said, these are the first digital natives. They talk with their thumbs and not their tongues. For 100,000 years, we've been communicating in a particular way. We've been in community in a particular way, and now with this generation, we're like, let's try something new. And we wonder why we're seeing what we see. We have no longitudinal data study for what we're going through right now, right? And so when we take away the historic protective factor of religion and replace it with a brand new aggregating factor of social media, which is designed by social scientists and psychologists to keep people outraged and to keep people anxious, and then we wonder why our students are breaking. And then we put them in the pressure cooker of a university, and then we wonder why our students are breaking. Well, I think we are complicit in that in many ways. We have to think about our own role in creating the world in which they live in. So no generation has ever gone through what our students have gone through. I could talk a lot. I want to give the floor over to Vanessa, but let me just say one last thing here, is that when I got to USC, we had 20 mental health counselors and a 3-week waiting list to see one. About 8 years later, we had 40 mental health counselors and a 3-week wait list to see one. Today we have 80 mental health counselors at USC. That's an extraordinary number. I don't know any university that has that many. How long is our wait list to see one? 3 weeks. So we can barely keep up with the demand. We haven't tripled our student population since I've gotten there, but we've tripled our mental health counselors, and we're still not able to move the process any faster. And what I realized is that at one point I was appointed as vice provost of campus wellness and crisis intervention, so I began to think about this in a big way. And what I realized is that we're too busy operating downstream. All we do is triage crisis at its worst, and then we move on to triage crisis, triage crisis, triage crisis. We're just trying to get people out of the river. But we're not going upstream to see why people are getting in that river to begin with. And so the goal of my office, and Vanessa will talk about how we do this, is to operate upstream, to give people the tools, perspective, techniques, communities, and confidence to be proactive in their own thriving, well-being, and flourishing, right? To give them the power to not get into that river to begin with. And my thesis is that the more we do upstream, the less crisis, threat, and suffering we're going to triage downstream. The challenge is that you can't prove a negative. You can't prove that because we're operating upstream, there's less crisis downstream. It's hard to fund things that you can't prove. It's hard to fund the proactive work. It's easier to fund the reactive work. And yet, as long as we're reactive, we're never actually solving the problem. We're not empowering students in sort of the art of living, or we're not connecting them to the possibility of a spiritual life. The primary issue right now that I see is, my teacher Deepak Chopra tells me there's 5 crises in the world today. There's war, justice, sustainability, and health. Those are the 4 that we all know about. But he says that the 5th crisis is the most important, and if we don't solve this crisis, we can't solve the other 4. And not all of us can solve the other 4, but all of us have to be part of the solution to the 5th. He says the 5th crisis is the crisis of joy. And I see that on my campus and in the world. And so I've become an evangelist for joy. And so I've been thinking about, like, how are people happy? Like, how do people find joy? What's going on? And so every year I look at the UN's list of the happiest countries in the world. And every year Norway's #1 and the Scandinavian countries are like 2, 3, 4, right? And I keep wondering, how is it possible that in a country with terrible weather and high taxes, people are so happy? I mean, I understand the high tax part living in California, but not the terrible weather part. How could you be that happy? Right? And what I realized is that people aren't happy in Norway because they pay high taxes or because they have terrible weather. They're happy because they have trust. They have trust that their taxes are going to benefit them. They have trust that their democratic processes are working. They have trust because when they pay that tax, they get a benefit. They get health care. They get education. They get a pension. They have trust that their institutions have their back. Young people today have no trust in institutions. We've moved from institutions to individuals, right? They have no trust in universities. Trust me on that one. We get petitions every day. You can see what's happening with the encampments and the fact that now universities are arresting their own students. That's eroded whatever little trust there was to begin with. So they have no trust in their own educational institutions. They have no trust in their political institutions. That's why young people are going to sit out this election or vote third party or be independent, because they just do not trust the political institutions. They have no trust in economic institutions. Why do you think we have a $1 trillion cryptocurrency industry? It's largely driven by millennials and post-millennials who have no trust in banking or third-party intermediaries because of what they've seen with the 2008 financial crisis, with the Federal Reserve, and with the insane inflation that's going on in this country right now. They have no trust. And they have no trust in religious institutions. That's why 51% are not affiliated with religion. So without trust, how do you thrive? How do you flourish? How do you find joy? I think that is the fundamental challenge right now on our campus. And when you don't have trust, you have the spiritual crisis that I see at the root of all this. And that is the spiritual crisis of loneliness. Cigna said that the loneliest people in the country right now, Cigna is this healthcare group, are not the oldest people. Historically, it was the oldest people who are the loneliest, right? And we all know that being lonely has a public health consequence. Being lonely, extreme loneliness is the equivalent of smoking a pack of cigarettes a day, that it can take 7 years off your life, right? And we know that when you're older, being lonely is a contributor to premature death. But for the first time, probably in our history, the Cigna is telling us that the loneliest people in the country are not the oldest, but 18 to 26-year-olds. Those are our college students. Our college students who are on campuses with 50,000 people their age are lonelier than anyone in the country right now, right? And so I think at the root of it, we have to crack the crisis of loneliness for young people, the crisis of disconnection, to understand that social media has made our students antisocial, has made them less connected, has given them FOMO, has made them feel less than on a campus which has a 9% acceptance rate. 70% of my students feel like imposters. How is that even possible? How is that even possible?
I was left inspired by all of these conversations. I think that where spirituality has been left out of solving the world's biggest crises and addressing our most critical problems that our communities face, spirituality has a lot to offer. And I love what Dean Baroncini was sharing here, because he was speaking about this trust that leads to joy. And that is exactly what the 7 organizations that we highlighted are doing. They're building trust in their communities by engaging in spiritual practices, and in very real ways they are engaging their people and helping them heal through medicinal practices as well, and through addressing the social determinants of health, addressing things like immigration status, addressing things like housing. And you'll see that some of the other organizations that I wasn't able to highlight today are doing just that. And our hope with this is that we can see how this is spiritualities that promote the integration of the whole being, and believe in every person, believe that every person has inherent dignity and worth, and spiritualities that promote communal involvement and mutual care, pro-social behaviors that honor the natural world and seek to build systems of possibility where everyone can thrive, that those spiritualities have power to fuel change and create communities of belonging, and contribute to putting together the pieces that had fractured our world and prevented our wholeness. And so with this project, our hope was to take these stories, to take what we experienced there and put it in the hands of policymakers. And that's part of what we'll continue to do in this process, and health officials, so that this conversation of bringing these 3 spheres, the health sphere, the faith, spiritual healing sphere, and the policymaking spheres in one place, could bring us closer to having systems that really promote the thriving of all. So communities thrive when people flourish in their spiritual practices. People who relate well to their own selves, their neighbors, and natural worlds, and consciously engage in the systems in which they participate, are better able to build healthy communities. Investing in spiritual well-being of our communities is investing in health. So with that, we have a few minutes for any questions that you may have, or anything that is resonating with you that you'd like to share with us. And so we invite you to pop on some of your questions either in the chat or raise your hand, and we can address them there. We want to thank you so much for spending this hour with us. Thomas, let me see. Renee, can you help us unmute?
So we can't call on people since this is a webinar, but if you do have a question, please put it in the chat or in the Q&A feature. There's a question in the chat that says, did you talk about growing disjunct between spirituality and the organized church and whether there are ways to address this gap? From Rick.
Yeah, so a lot of this new, a lot of the organizations that we highlighted, I would say like the majority of them were actually new expressions of dealing exactly with what Dean Barunzani was talking about, which was there's a lot of distrust from these organizations. So we talked a lot about what they were doing to do that. I think addressing the gap between trusting institutionalized religion is something that we still need to talk about. You know, there's healing that needs to happen internally in those communities to help shepherd many of these communities to be welcoming for all. And so part of the work that Sojourners does is that we publish lots of articles that help people think about how to create more inclusive communities. And so that's some of what we hope to address. So we don't have a specific ways of how we're addressing this now, but here's one story that I know is having what we call bridges. Bridges are people who float both worlds well, the institutionalized worlds and the new creation of communities worlds. And so people that understand those cultures and that have deep love for someone, not everyone is called to be in those spaces, but I know that there are some people that are called to like love and transform institutions and to be in community with them, and who are also in other spaces with folks that are creating new communities and can bridge between the two. And so identifying who are the bridges, I know that's a project. One of the stories that we highlighted there is Puentes. The community of Puentes in Santana, California is a community that started in some ways as a way to work both with the institutional church and some of the folks that are not in the institutional churches. So I invited to look at that as well.
And we have another question in the chat from Thomas. He says, are these findings going to be shared in the MAG or in the daily reflections? And could we be directed towards personal resources in the various cities, maybe starting here in DC?
Yes. So for now, we have the Pathways to Wholeness website, which we'll put in the chat shortly, where you can access all of these resources. So you're able to watch the 7 videos that we produce that uplift the stories of folks. And then we have the highlights from this symposium as well. So you can learn more about what happened there through accessing the resources here. Our hope is also to share some of, we have a one-pager that we're sharing with certain lawmakers, but we'd love to continue these conversations, and having this webinar is part of like, how will we continue to deepen this conversation? So I know we're hitting the top of the hour, but if there's any other comments or any other questions that you'd like to bring into the space, I welcome you to do that. And if not, I want to thank you for spending this hour with us. I think that this is an important conversation that we want to continue having, not just for the sake of conversing, but for what it will mean to our communities, to be able to integrate all of the all of our health and our faith and our spirituality. And Renee, I think the link that you shared went only to the panelists and hosts. So if you want to reshare it into like everyone, that would be great so that folks can access the pathways to wholeness.net. We want to have this conversations because we know that if policymakers, if health officials, and if faith leaders become more aware of how they can work together, that our communities will be more whole and experience more joy and begin to trust one another. So we're going to welcome your ideas here in the future. We want to thank you again for joining us on this webinar. And yeah, let's visit our website and be sure to sign up for updates as Renee shared in there. So thank you again for joining us, and we look forward to being in touch through our SojoAction newsletters.